I first heard Steely Dan back in Kansas City, Missouri, where I ended up living with my dad after running away from home a second summer in a row. It was 1970 and I was just 15 years old. Do It Again was playing on the radio that summer night. I had just dropped some acid and I was on my way to see Led Zeppelin for their KC concert on their first USA tour. My date was a fat guy I had just met, him driving by and said, "Hey, you wanna go to a concert?" He had high hopes, I guess, and I just wanted to get out of the house. What I remember more than Led Zeppelin though is Do It Again drumming through the twilight heat, and the joy of all that Victor Feldman percussion. Sexy contained. Because what the Dan accomplished was this: they introduced a new idea into the musical conversation of the time. It was the idea that intelligent music was cool. In a year where drum solos lasted minutes, quarter hours even, and singers screamed a lot, Steely Dan made it cool to be educated. It is safe to say that they are the beginning of college rock. There, right there, that's where that idea begins. Two homely guys who write with a fortitude that no one else processed. None of this emotional crap. They were all business. Which led to sophistication. Which is how they are categorized by punk rockers today. Which is kind of funny, because they love the simplicity of the blues and 12-bar rock and roll. Yes, they were, more or less, responsible for the drum machine, built by their engineer Roger Nichols. But I like to think that was some kind of punishment for being so exacting from every player they worked with. By the time I started college, 1973, Reelin' in the Years had become a college anthem. And now with the release of Countdown to Ecstasy, kids were bringing the record just to stare at the cover. It was holy ground, it was biblical. It was also cynical and kind of, well, women hating. They seemed to really be obsessed with women they did not really like. I would come to understand some of how that came about, personal information I am not prepared to share, even though Walter has died. Those heartaches go with him to his grave. Steely Dan became a part of my life in a much more personal basis in the next few years. That boyfriend from Living It Up, he practiced Steely Dan solos non-stop. I can sing most of the solo from Kid Charlemagne. But I think they were part of my life long before they formed their dildo name duo. In case you don't know by now, Steely Dan is a dildo in the book Naked Lunch, by the famous drug addict William Burroughs. I read that book, too, but I don't really remember the dildo passage. The duo's first success was as songwriters. 60s rock band Jay and the Americans hired Fagan and Becker as their backup band. I believe the rest of the group became an early incarnation of Steely Dan. In case you don't remember Jay, he was a handsome all-American guy along the lines of Paul Revere and the Raiders. At least to my 13-year-old brain they were about the same. He sang songs like Only in America and Come a Little Bit Closer, one of those rather dubious lyrics about the morality of certain women. Dolly back to Santa Monica College. We were four of us, hanging on the lawn during breaks, going to clubs on Main Street some nights, Pink Elephant, a newly discovered gay bar, we'd go dance to I Will Survive on the jukebox. Turned out one of us had not yet come out of the closet, but that's another story. The best musician of our group loved his Steely Dan, and that was how I came to hear Bodhisattva, my old school, Pearl of the Quarter. Lines about Annandale and oleanders with pesky stomping bass and drums. I mean, these guys knew how to make music. They had a hit on every record, I mean a thing that was played on the radio over and over, that became part of how we saw our collective selves. I was brought up, you might say, on writing thick with imagery and subtle implication, and I loved it. I loved the innuendo, the humor, the sting. The genius was as much in the part we filled in, the lines they didn't write. That was where the sticky stuff of memory made their music a part of our own personal history. I knew about hiding behind the oleanders. Heck, I grew up in Arizona. In case the orb forgot to tell you, it wasn't the specific line, it was the sorrow and fury of the melody. Bring back the Boston rag. Tell all your buddies that it ain't no drag. I was only 19, and I wanted it to come back, and I didn't even know what it was. I felt the melody, you get me? Johnny swept the playroom and he swallowed up all he found. It was 48 hours till Lonnie came around. I have often said that so much of what we write seems to be prophetic. Walter lost too many people to drugs. He found too many people laying on the floor. The bed. Too many heartbreaks. Walter and Arnold. Walter Becker, the quiet half, the straight man to Donald Fagen's main man. Donald the voice, and Walter. Walter W.